Mood, memory, and brain is the real deal. Check out this review we just got, guys. My husband and I purchased a bottle of Mood, Memory, and Brain 3 weeks ago and take 2 to 3 capsules daily in the morning. Since then, I have felt mentally clear, able to work through the day without the usual mid afternoon slump. And my husband, who has had ADHD and anxiety since he was 12 years old, is thriving positively with far less anxiety. He's able to concentrate more on tasks and in a far better mood than before. This is huge progress in our lives, and I'm absolutely thrilled about it. We are very appreciative of Dr. Saladino and his work, bringing forth what we all truly need to live our best lives and in good health, especially during these times. Thank you. That is from Enid M. These kind of things really warm my heart and make me super excited about what we're doing at Heart and Soil. We make grass-fed, grass-finished, regeneratively raised, desiccated, that is freeze-dried to preserve all the nutrients, organs in capsules. So they're super easy for you guys to take. It's really hard to get brain in your diet. So we recently released Mood, Memory, and Brain. This is my favorite new one. I take brain every single day when I'm in Costa Rica and when I'm here in Texas, and I pair it with whole package to get my dose of testicle, desiccated testicle. You can find us at heartandsoil.co. Our mission, my mission, is to help you reclaim your birthright to radical health. I think a huge part of that is getting organs in your diet as part of a carnivore-ish or animal-based diet. And a lot of those organs are hard to get. So let us help you with the best organs on the planet. Check us out, heartandsoil.co. Again, reclaim your birthright to radical health, my people. This is what it's all about. My guest on this week's podcast is Aaron Alexander. He's a good friend here in Austin. We got the chance to move, to work out, and to think about movement. And this is what Aaron thinks about all the time. But he doesn't just think about movement during a workout. He thinks about how we move during the day, every day, and the lifestyle. I love Aaron's perspective. It's very ancestral. He has a re-release of his book called The Align Method coming out in January. He has a podcast called The Align Podcast. He's an amazing human. You can follow him on the socials at Align Podcast. You'll learn a ton from him. And he has this very ancestral perspective on how we should live our lives, being outside, sunlight, looking at the horizon, looking up, looking certain ways with our eyes, moving in a certain way, sitting, our hip flexors, our internal tension, our pelvic floor, all these things. This is an amazingly fun, good, quick conversational reminder for you guys. I think you're getting a lot out of this one. I love to deep squat. I'm always deep squatting. I try to deep squat when I'm answering my text messages. It's primarily due to Aaron's inspiration. So enjoy this podcast with Aaron Alexander. I think you're getting a lot out that you can use in other places in your life and incorporate that full message of the remembering, not just in the food, with the meat, organs, fruit, honey, and raw dairy, but also in the movement and the way that you live your life. He's an amazing human. Enjoy this one. If you like this podcast, please leave me a review at Apple Podcasts or share it with your friends. The remembering is always growing. People are waking up to the fact that we are living an evolutionarily inconsistent life, eating the wrong foods, moving in the wrong ways. And a review at Apple Podcasts helps this podcast reach way more people, which is what it's all about. So thank you for that. As a thank you to you guys who leave me a review at Apple Podcasts, I give away one signed copy of my book every month to someone who does that. So thank you for that. All right, on to the podcast with Aaron Alexander. Enjoy this one, guys. I love you all. Stay radical and reclaim your birthright to radical health, my people. Aaron Alexander, thanks for coming on the podcast, brother.
Paul Saladino, thank you for doing this again.
It's always good to see you.
It's been a bit.
It
hasn't been a bit since I saw you. It's been a bit since we recorded a conversation.
It's been at least a couple months. The last one was in the sauna at Ocean Lab.
Oh, that's true.
When you had you literally brought your podcast setup into the sauna at Ocean Lab, and then you had part of it outside of the sauna so it wouldn't overheat.
Yeah, that's the move. I've been doing that. I did that on, so you've been on my podcast, I think, a couple times or so.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I try in each episode, every time I meet with a person, I see it as an opportunity to connect with the person in like a deeper, more, I don't know, like a fun, memorable way. And also I'm aware that our environment, which is essentially like what my whole life is about in the book and the podcast and all that, it informs the way that we think, it informs the way that we feel, it informs the way that we move. So setting the stage, if you have like a romantic dinner with a girl or a guy or whatever, you're not going to have blaring blue lights on. You're not going to have like loud construction stuff going. You're you're going to like make it soothing, red lights, soothing music. So maybe some like sax or jazz or something in the background, water sounds. So those are all things that we think about when the conversation matters, or the date matters or the business meeting matters. We pay attention to the clothing that we wear, the type of virtue signaling that we're putting out. So we can start to implement those little, well, not those major factors into our daily life if we just begin to engage a little bit of attention into it. So that is why I would record with people in the sauna.
I love it. It makes me a little bit self-conscious about my blue lights. Well, welcome to Heart and Soil Studios, by the way. This is the first podcast recorded at Heart and Soil Studios.
Oh no!
And I've got the bull, the cow skull. That's about all we've got right now, but we're going to make it a little better. So
how beautiful!
This is setting the ambiance. This is from White Oak Pastures. They sent us a skull.
Such an incredible piece of art.
It's really cool. Yeah. And I want to get I want to get a buffalo one from Rome as well, and put that out there too. And in the background, in the backyard of Heart and Soil Studios is a cold plunge, but nobody can really hear the cold plunge water sounds, but we can imagine.
Yeah, it's nice.
So when we were working out yesterday at On It, it was fun. Thanks for working out with me. And you said something that struck me, which was that your perspective, your book, which is coming out in January, right?
January 11th.
11th.
The Align Method.
Okay. Is more about perspective on how to move every day than like how to work out. So, and we talked about this on the previous podcast we did. This is the second time you've been on my podcast. Yeah. People can refer to the first one. We'll link to it. Yeah. But tell me a little bit about how you conceptualize humans in 2021/2022 in our potentially discordant environment that doesn't encourage movement that may be evolutionarily consistent, and how we can incorporate more of these movements back into our life. If I framed that properly, feel free to reframe it if I didn't.
You framed it perfectly. And I think, so the first thing, I think it's very easy to become judgmental about the way a person lives their life, or the way a person moves or doesn't move, or, CrossFit's the best, or maybe yoga's the best, or Olympic weightlifting, or, marathon, whatever you're into. You get deep into your tunnel, or most people, I get deep into my tunnels. I think it's pretty common among people. And then you start to see that everywhere. You see evidence reaffirming your bias everywhere. So obviously there's like the social dilemma aspect of this, but then there's like, what is it called? The RAS, the reticular activating system. We're continually seeking things out to confirm our bias, and so for me, I think the first most important thing with working with a client, or, people listening, would be first just defining what your goal is. So if your goal is to be a triathlete, then it's really important for you to be just swimming laps and going in that like type A fun, just repetitive motion going through, or running or biking, but if your goal is to feel at ease in your body, or to feel balanced or integrated, or, any of those things, I probably wouldn't recommend you bust your ass on a bike for 4 hours a day. But if you want to win this competition, I recommend you bust your ass on a bike 4 hours a day. So first it's coming into just defining like, what is your goal? There's no moralistic judgment, no right, no wrong. What is your goal? And then from there, we can start to reverse engineer back and say, okay, what arrives us to that point most effectively? And for me personally, and I think most people in general, goals that I find to be valuable would be general adaptability. You can put me into a cold plunge, or put me up on the top of a mountain, or maybe we're going free diving, or maybe we're going to train jujitsu, or maybe we're going to box, or maybe we're going to run, or maybe we're going to play anything, whatever, Foursquare, whatever the thing is, like, okay, cool. Like I can do this, and then longevity would be another thing. I don't want to martyr my joints and my body to win a competition. I'd rather live my life in such a way that every day I gradually get a little bit better. I hone in a little bit more. And so what we're doing in modernity in 2021, like it's the opposite of, we're encouraged not to move. If you look at like any signs or it's like movement is a liability. Don't walk here, don't run here, no playing, no roughhousing, and so it's like, it's actually, we don't really receive much stimuli from the modern world to actually engage a physical relationship with our bodies unless we're in a specific studio that's what we do. So we have our whole entire life, and then we have these little tiny compartmentalized moments where it's like, okay, this is where you engage with your physicality. And if you guys just got back from Tanzania with the Hadza tribes, And there was an interesting research done from University of California where they went out to, they're in northern Tanzania, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so they went out to northern Tanzania, spent some time with Hadza people, and they hooked them up with a bunch of devices around their hips and their knees to measure their movement throughout the day. And they're generally studying them and communicating with them, whatnot. And what they found was that the Hadza people, and probably most hunter-gatherer tribes, they rest a lot. Like they sit a lot. It's not like we have this romanticized idea, I think, that's been communicated in podcasts and books and from Instagram influencers or whatever, that's like, okay, the hunter-gatherer ancestral life, so you're just always walking, or reaching up, it's like, you're resting a lot. And then what they found was and you would know more about this than I do based off of the research. But on average, they would be in resting positions, active resting positions for, I believe I think it was 9.82 hours. So like 9 to 10 hours a day, which is pretty darn consistent with Western culture or industrialized cultures.
Yeah.
The difference was the manner in which they were resting. So they are kneeling, they are squatting, they are maybe in like a sukhasana, like a cross-legged position. They wouldn't call it sukhasana, but they're doing these natural positions that you'd see any small child, like pre-age 5, age 4, just naturally that's the way they live their lives. And so if you don't even necessarily need a book per se, you could just hang out with a kid. If you got access to some kids under like 4 years old or so, just observe what they do. And what they're going to do is they're naturally compelled. They have this inherent, I don't know, like it's like this inner wisdom of sorts where they're like governed by their biology. And so their cells are saying, okay, we need to twist, we need to turn, we need to compress, we need to rehydrate ourselves, we need to circulate ourselves. And then we start to learn how we're supposed to be adults, who we think we're supposed to be. And that looks like maybe sitting in a chair, for a really long time, staring into screens for a really long time, getting into a couch, getting into the car seat, getting like your whole day for the most part is in that same archetypal, just hunched over, kind of staring at a screen position. So that's the issue. It's not that we can't rest. It's not that we can't sit. We just, if we care, it's, what's your goal? If we care about longevity, adaptability, durability, strength, flexibility, then it would behoove us to start to integrate a little bit of attention into how we rest.
And I think those are really, really good goals. And I share the same goals: longevity, adaptability, durability, flexibility, strength, and range. And I agree that if you're a triathlete, you got to swim and ride a bike.
Yeah.
But for most of us, we want to be able to do a lot of things. I want to be able to surf, climb rocks occasionally, jump off waterfalls, all this kind of thing. Slackline, go with you to the gym, pull a sled,
hang out with your kids.
Yeah.
Hang out with the dog.
Dance.
Yeah. Pick something up off of the ground without blowing your back out.
Break dance.
Yeah. Whatever.
Who knows? Climb a tree.
Smile.
Yeah. All these things. And so I love this. And this is a really interesting observation. So I'll tell you what I observed with the Hadza when I was in Tanzania. They live in Lake Eyasi, which is this sort of northern region by Kilimanjaro, about 4 hours west of Kilimanjaro. And there's only a few tribes left. There's probably less than 1,000 of these Hadza left on the planet. And the one tribe that I was with for about a solid week straight, some days they would hunt fervently, and some days they would just chill out for at least half the day or part of the day. Right. But there are no chairs. The chairs are certainly a modern invention, and I wonder where they came from. But they definitely squat by necessity, and sometimes they would have a log on the ground that was 8 to 10 inches high, but they would essentially be deep squatting onto a log. Yeah. Or they would be cross-legged, and when they were super welcoming, what they would do is they would just bring over a deer skin or an animal skin, put it on the dirt, and they'd be like, here. And that's like them saying, here, have a seat on my couch. Yeah. A Hadza couch is a deer skin on the dirt, which means like, okay, here's a flat piece of ground that I have to position myself on as a human. And I love your perspective on this. Like, we should be doing that more. So my question to you is, how much furniture do you own at your house? Do you have any chairs?
My house looks normal.
It is.
That's the thing. So right now, that's something that I'm really interested in engaging with as well, is the convergence of old and present, or new, where it doesn't need to be that we completely abandon the present culture. And it's like if you go too far down that that line, it becomes alienating, and that's, I'm like, okay, cool. Like nobody's wrong, so like, I love your chair, I like whatever you're into. Like I love, like I can adapt. So in this scenario,
you're sitting cross-legged on my chair.
Like you can't see it in the video, but I'm full cross-legged, like Sukhasana guy right now. And it's not to prove a point. It's because it's genuinely more comfortable for me. So while I'm in this position, one, if I was digesting anything, I'm not right now, but it would be more effective for digestion because I'm pulling my legs up closer to my vital organs. So I don't have all this blood that could be utilized for, all the stuff happening in my visceral situation here. Instead, it's pulling up down to my lower compartments, and cankles and all that stuff. It's not a very sexy look, and it's also incredibly unhealthy. It's a huge liability. So in this moment here, I would much rather use this time with you to connect with somebody that I care about. So that's community. Maybe we'll even come in contact with each other at some point, which is a whole nother variable of health. It's invaluable. We're exchanging information through pheromones in our olfactory system and our visual system and our auditory system. Like there's so much magic in the moment of just being with a person. So I don't have any interest in alienating myself or anyone else to say that I'm right and someone's wrong, or I'm going to go live out in the middle of the woods and become Unabomber, and just be like, it's going astray. I'm like, no, like culture's fine. Like I can adapt to this. Right. And so that's the big thing. In my house, I have a normal couch. I've got like a big screen TV. It's not like excessive, but I like watching documentaries and stuff, playing music on it, got like surround sound situation, whatever. So it's like nice to come over. I got, candles and salt lamps and such. So, and I have a big red, near far infrared light. So at nighttime, once the sun goes down, I'll just flip that guy on and I turn the blue lights off. I have floor cushions, so I have like Moroccan poofs around. I've got a comfy rug that's like a shag rug. So it's like inviting. I have a trampoline.
In your house?
Yeah, one of those rebounders.
Uh-huh.
I've got a rebounder in my living room. I've got like a sound bowl. I've got a didgeridoo. I've got a Native American flute. I have a whole bin with various different self-care apparatus. I've got percussion guns and foam rollers, and so I have stuff. Like you walk into my house, you're immediately in my bedroom. I have a yoga silk that looks like a sex swing, but it's actually a yoga silk. I have a biomat underneath that. I have a set of Sadhu nail boards in my living room as well. So they're like really beautiful wood. They're engraved. They have this like stonework. It's gorgeous.
What do you do with those?
You stand on them.
You stand on a Sadhu nail board.
Yeah.
And it like just activates all the parts of your foot, almost like reflexology.
Yeah. And it's like the big thing is it's like a mindfulness practice. So being able to engage with the sensation of pain without just immediately being compelled to like run away, like, oh, I don't like it. It's the same as a cold plunge. It's just nails on your feet.
I want to get one of those again. I went to PaleoFX a few years ago and there was a company, I haven't seen them around in a while. Did you see this company? They made these balls with like metal spikes on the outside.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And they made a mat that I had in my previous living quarters that was like a spike mat. And I would loved it when people would come over because they would try and stand on it.
Yeah.
And it was just fun to see how people reacted going from sitting to standing on this. Essentially, it was a nail board. And I really liked it. And we had contests so you could stand on it the longest and all this stuff.
You should get a nail board. You'd like it a lot. They're very, very cool. And it's just a beautiful. So for me, those are things. I have a cold plunge. Those are things that, and I also have normal stuff. I have, forks and knives and plates and, art. Like it's like
I only use sticks. I only use sticks to eat, bro. So just so you know, I'm judging you right now.
But I just went through like all like the weirdities that are in there, which weird is actually a beautiful word. The original meaning of weird is fate, so I think it's an old English word. I think it's like pronounced weird or something like that. And I'm butchering that for sure. But the meaning of it is fate. And so a person that is weird, I think we talked about this, is in control of their fate. Yeah, we talked about this in the last episode. I remember that now. We're sitting outside after shooting the bow. And so weird is such a beautiful thing. It's like, but it doesn't need to be, I think sometimes we can kind of fill in our own kind of like, if we're going out of our way to prove a point that we're different, that's not the point. It's feeling into what is genuinely authentic to you, what genuinely feels good for you, and spending more time listening into that. Because I think so much of our life is we're just bombarded by other people's opinions and prerogatives of what we should think, be, do, and buy. So I think that weird thing is such a beautiful thing, because it's just like to be in control of one's fate, to say like, this feels true to me. So for me, it feels true for me to cross my legs in this chair. I'm opening up my adductors, opening up my hip flexors, open up, getting some hyaluronic fluid and all. I'm like squeezing out all of the old and bringing in the new into my joints here. I'm mobilizing myself. So I'm like, cool, that feels true. Weird. There's not going to be really anybody else in like a boardroom that's like crossing their legs, but it feels true to me. So I think that's the big thing, is not trying to prove any points, just listening into what genuinely feels true to you and following that. And what feels true to you or me or anybody today might not be what feels true to us tomorrow or in 10 days. So having that flexibility of like, cool, I tried on that align method, cross my legs up, get some floor cushions, spend some time on the ground, basic stuff, and now I'm not into it. It's like, cool, move on. But actively engage and pay attention. Like, you are your own scientific study. So every day, I think just running the experiment is really important.
I love it. And I really think that your perspective on movement is an ancestral perspective. I don't know
100%.
Yeah. I mean, you brought up the Hadza, so I would imagine you frame it in a similar way. Like, absolutely. And that's what I like about your work and your book. And a lot of these concepts you're talking about are things that we would have been doing as humans that, again, we've lost.
Yep.
I'm super excited about this idea of the remembering, primarily with food, but also with movement and sunlight, all these things.
Yeah.
But I see these concepts as very ancestral, very evolutionarily consistent. I think about a species appropriate diet. I think there's probably species appropriate positions for humans to be in.
100%.
And we talked about the Hadza. So let's talk about a deep squat, because I remember we talked about this in the first podcast as well, but your like scientific analysis of a deep squat was awesome. You like broke down a deep squat like I've never heard anybody break down a deep squat.
Cool.
So this Hadza definitely spend a lot of time in deep squat. Yeah. I've got a 4-year-old niece and a 2-year-old nephew. They deep squat all the freaking time. People know this who have kids.
Yeah.
So what do you think about deep squatting? I saw a picture of you with your brother on Mount Whitney, and you guys were both deep squatting in the snow. I know you like this, but
that wasn't my brother. That was Amar from Yes Theory.
Oh, okay. For some reason, I thought it was your brother. I reread the caption wrong.
That's great. No, I say he's like my brother, like new age brother. Yeah,
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
Really, it was a really good time on Mount Whitney. Yeah, this squat, it does a lot of things. One, we have these inherent, it sounds a little out there, but I would call them like healing mechanisms. They're like inherent with since we were prokaryotes and eukaryotes, and we were fish, and then we were land mammals, and then we were up in trees, depending upon your belief system. But when you're in that, say, that arboreal environment, you're cruising on the tree, you're moved by the tree, right? When you come down to the ground, you're naturally going to get all the way down to the ground. And the most biomechanically effective way to do that, especially if you're going to be resting, would just be to pop a squat. And what's interesting with that as well, not only does it make sense for just navigating terrain, for you to, more evidence of why this is relevant to the human form, as you defecate, you're taking a dump in the woods or a toilet or wherever, when you go into that deep squat position and your pelvis starts to come down below your knees there, you're elongating your rectum. So you're actually releasing space for you to allow a bowel movement. When you start to raise that up, your rectum naturally kinks a little bit. So it's called the anorectal angle will increase, and so that way you don't poop your pants while you're taking a walk. So it literally, not just that it's helpful with restoring range of motion in the ankles and the knees and the pelvic floor, which pelvic floor dysfunction is becoming more common. The adult diaper industry is soon to increase that of the baby diaper industry.
What?
It's a whole industry. You get to a certain age and you're like, oh man, I guess you just kind of pee yourself a little bit. It's hard to keep control of that space down there. And then culturally, we don't really have, I think there's not a real regular conversation around pelvic floor health, or like your sexual organs or visceral health. There's almost like a shadow space in there. whereas you go like maybe like Eastern cultures, it's much more of a conversation. It's much more present. Your Dantian, you get in, it's like, oh yeah, your hara. You're very aware of your abdominal cavity. Western culture, it's like, our awareness is pretty much like maybe you have IBS or something, and then you're going to take some probiotics or something. Like it's all like our relationship to our viscera and pelvic floor and all that is pretty much from our mouth. Like that, we don't have much of a mechanical relationship down there.
I feel like maybe some women think about pelvic floor stuff, but definitely not any dudes I know.
Yeah, it's very rare. And do women think about that maybe out of fear of having dysfunction, or there's already dysfunction? But it's a general part of, again, creating adaptability and strength and, longevity and all of those things. I don't think it's thought about too much, at least in the conversations that I'm around.
I just want you to know I'm doing like man kegels right now as I'm listening to you.
That's beautiful.
And I started sitting in cross-legged position. But,
that's cool.
But like, okay, so like the deep squat, you're like opening up the rectum. And I was thinking as you were telling me that of times that I've been in the woods with friends.
Yeah.
And they were like, I can't find a tree to poop. And I'm thinking, what the hell do you need a tree for to poop? Like they had to hang on to a tree to poop because they couldn't get into a deep squat, or we're just so, we're so estranged from deep squatting that my friends had to find a specifically shaped tree to hold on to achieve a semi 90-degree angle to poop in the woods. Wow.
To be constipated in the woods.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's be, yeah. A lot of people I know poop less in the woods.
Or hemorrhoids.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to, that's not a poop. Like your butt, it shouldn't be hard to eat. It shouldn't be hard to have sex. It shouldn't be hard to poop. It shouldn't be hard to breathe. It shouldn't be hard to sleep. It shouldn't be hard to wake up. If it is, you have self-induced impingements in your lifestyle. The solution probably isn't a pill. There's probably not as much of an allopathic solution as much as like a root source, like what's going on at the baseline mechanics of how I exist in my body. Is there some way that I can create more space to allow whatever it is I'm trying to get out of me or get into me? And, the deep squat, that's like an even pregnancy. Like if you want to move something out of your body, it creates space for that to happen. It also decompresses the lower back. So a lot of people maybe they have disc herniations or they have, back pain. It's like 80% of all Americans are going to experience some type of chronic back pain at some point in their life, is the statistic, common statistic. So that's like, is that just what it is to be a human? Is just to be in pain, or to be stiff, or to feel like kind of disconnected from your body? Or is that something that you learned? And I would, based off of my limited experience of people that seem to live more ancestral lifestyles, hanging out in like Peru and Ecuador and hanging out with people that really are pretty untouched, not like Hadza untouched, but 80 odd year old women with 50 pounds of logs strapped to their back, wrapped over their head. And the way that they're doing that is because the strap is actually going across I think it's like their forehead. I don't remember exactly. Have you ever seen that before? It's like a backpack they wear.
Yeah.
And so because of that, if they go into this common forward head posture, AKA upper cross syndrome, we were talking about that before, where the muscles in the back, the suboccipital ridge space gets all shortened down, and the muscles in the front, pec major, minor, get shortened down, and then you get elongated and disengaged from the low traps, mid traps, rhomboids. So there's this disengagement on one side and hypertonicity on the other side. If you're in that forward head posture, simple way of just saying your head's jutting forward, and you strap 50, 60 pounds of logs to your head, you're not doing it. You're not moving anywhere. So that woman that's cruising through the woods, that I have like this like it's like ingrained in my mind, seeing these women walking around and just like so robust. And the mechanics of the way that she's moving through the woods, pretty close to perfect. And it's like, what's happening? It's like, her environment necessitated that. She never had the opportunity to sit on a chair for 12 hours a day. She never had the opportunity to have raised heeled shoes that she's walking around, She never had the opportunity to augment the function of her visual system and be staring into being inside of a room where you can't see more than 10 to 15 feet at a time, and not exposing yourself to the natural photons of light that literally change the shape of your eyeball. Like when you go outside, sunlight it's a form of, I would argue that's a form of nutrition. Like your body processes, it's a physical thing that your body processes. And it creates mechanical, chemical change in who you are. So that woman, she's been amongst that for, a long time. And we as Western people, we're amongst that too. We just need to make the conscious choice to do the things. That's the difference. It's not that we're really inhibited from anything or we don't have access. We have access to all the things. Going outside, and, like we're here at your HQ, and everybody that works with you, they're all working outside. They're all by a pool, so they're all like, there's Wi-Fi, I'd imagine, because they're on their computers, but they're grounded as they're doing it, so they're offsetting a lot of the deleterious effects of that radiation because they're by trees, they're by grass. That's pretty cool. So many people work on computers inside office. Maybe, they're on like the 10th floor of the office, and they're not getting any natural light, and they're in these chairs, and it's just flat, kind of like lifeless space that they're in. Life begets life. Put yourself around life, suddenly you get some more momentum in that direction. And so it's just a matter of grabbing yourself by the neck and saying, all right, like, we're going outside. I'm going to take these. I have 45 minutes of calls today. I'm going to go outside. I'm going to take a walk. I'm going to actively look up, and acknowledge that my visual system is continuous with my central nervous system. So as I'm myopically focusing in on something, say a screen in front of me or a wall in front of me, that cues me up to go more into that executive function, kind of like get up and at 'em type place, a little bit more like sympathetic type place. As I take in the whole room or take in, the panorama, take in the horizon, it sends the cue into my physiology. It's like, okay, obviously Paul's not under attack right now, or he wouldn't be taking in the whole panorama. If there's suddenly some type of threat in the room, all of Paul's attention right into that point. So that's oscillating in and out. Just like every time we exhale, we're engaging that parasympathetic, calming, rest, digest side of the nervous system. Every time we inhale, we're activating more of that sympathetic, up and at 'em type place. You can see the change in the heart rate. You can, your whole body is continually getting massaged. Sympathetic, parasympathetic, sympathetic, parasympathetic, and even beyond that. But it's having access to the full scale of the way that you express yourself at a physiological level. And if you are putting yourself just outside, you get played by a broader range. If you're in this same sterile space for months, years, decades, your body gets dumb because your body's inherently lazy, because your body's super freaking smart. So it's like a lazy body is a smart body. It doesn't want to expend a bunch of unnecessary energy doing things that you don't need it to do. So if you don't give it cold exposure or heat exposure, then it just says, okay, cool. Like we're always going to be at 69 degrees. So there's no reason to even be prepared to adapt to anything else. If you never give it something to pick up, you never strap some logs under your head or maybe do a deadlift or a lunge or, whatever you're into, then your body just says, cool, atrophy. Like, awesome, no big deal. And so it's like we are not at a loss in modernity at all. We have access to everything that we need. Health is there. It's just a matter of actually engaging with it.
And I think that we have to remember all of these things were an inescapable part of our life as previous humans, right? There were no Hadza creating 90-degree angle chairs so that everybody can sit on them. You must walk. You must be outside. You must look at faraway vistas. You must do these. You must climb in a tree because you just killed a monkey in a tree and you have to go get it. You must pull a bow. You must do twisting motions. You must look, like you said, at the horizon in the sunlight. These were sort of required for humans. They were built in. Mm-hmm. Just like I think our food and our food choices were more built into the way we lived. Yeah. And I'm not saying, like you are, similarly not saying that we should all cast off our robes and go live in deerskins, though sometimes I'm fascinated by the romanticism of it.
Yeah.
But I do think we need to remember the food choices our ancestors made by virtue of being in a specific environment that provided for them in a different way than we are provided for today on the aisles of Whole Foods. Mm-hmm. It wasn't oat milk that the Hadza were eating, that's for freaking sure. And similarly, we need to remember the environmental cues that were shaping them out of necessity. They had to do all these things. It was just built in, and we've forgotten about it.
Yeah. And then it gets into, so from a Katie Bowman, have you done a podcast with Katie before?
Never done a podcast with her, but I know of her work.
Okay. Yeah. She's a sweetie. I just recorded a podcast with her just like a couple weeks ago. So I'm all, my mind's kind of engaged with her stuff right now. But an analogy that she, I think, probably presented before other people, pretty makes sense analogy would be thinking of movement almost as like nutrition, and so we can have these supplemental versions of fitness, which again, it's fine. Sometimes, like scurvy, that was an issue. The sailors weren't getting enough vitamin C, and it's like, okay, what do we need a supplement of some sort. It's like, oh, well, if you just bring a couple lemons or limes along, boom, nipped it in the bud. Which I don't know what your thoughts on that would be exactly, because they're lemons and limes, but whatever. In that scenario,
I like fruit.
Okay, good. So in that scenario,
and if they'd brought fresh meat, they wouldn't have gotten scurvy either. But they can't bring fresh meat.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. But nonetheless, so you could supplement with organs or supplement, whatever it is. But in that case, they needed a supplement form in order to make that trip. So in that case, with the physical body, there's a lot of moments where maybe like say specific rehab or prehab exercises or like bodybuilding style exercises or using a machine is totally fine. Especially when you are training a body that's not really completely integrated. Like when you start to kind of disconnect some points in the body, especially when say you do go in grade school and like we talked about, you're raising the raised heeled shoes and you're in the chair all day long, and you're going to naturally, and maybe your shoulders start to roll forward and head starts to go forward, and maybe you have some imbalanced breathing patterns, you're breathing through your mouth, especially when you're asleep would be a common thing, which that's a chapter in the Align Method book as well, getting into all that. And that was all within the book. I essentially reached out to all of like the world's leading experts for all these different conversations. So we did Andrew Huberman. He helped out with the visual chapter, and had Patrick McEwen. He did like the nose breathing. He didn't do it, but he revised and edited and helped me out with all that stuff. So I had people reached out to different people that were able to help with that, because to understand the entirety of everything that's happening in the body is such a big, complex subject. I think the value, I'm kind of going another tangent right now, but the value of humanity and the value of knowledge is, I think, leaning on each other and sharing information, and you've been investing your life focusing on, what you've been focusing on, and Andrew Huberman's been focusing on. So for us to be able to come together, that's what makes a powerful society. In the physical body, for the body to be able to come together, that's what makes a powerful body. So when we have these separated, specialized parts in the body, ultimately, it can be good at certain sports for a while, but there's going to be a cap, And so if we can start to integrate all of the parts in the body, then the body starts to, just through breathing and walking and sitting and standing and engaging and playing, it starts to kind of repair itself. And so with a body that's been, kind of coming back to the original thread, a body that's been highly disintegrated or disassociated or disconnected, sometimes having specific supplement-based movement practices can be helpful to re-engage deeply inhibited muscles that haven't had the lights on for maybe 15 years. Like they're off. Like they're not functioning parts of the body anymore. So to do some specific work into those places, maybe you can get some electric stimulus, maybe you can get some acupuncture, maybe you can get some, whatever, specific rehab exercises to re-engage those guys, to start to give them a little bit more energy, a little bit more activation, to eventually reintegrate back into a whole diet, back into a whole movement practice. And so that's where supplementation, I think, is fine, but ideally you're utilizing supplementation to arrive at a point of holism. from both a physical perspective and also a nutritional perspective. And, I'm glad we have supplements.
Me too. You had a post on Instagram maybe a month ago where you were doing a series of movements specifically aimed at helping people combat this forward head, shoulders forward, sitting on a computer posture. Some of them were, yeah. Do you want to run through those for people? Because I thought it was a great post, and
absolutely.
I think it's a great sort of set of tools for people to think about. So a little bit of supplemental, right? Like small,
for sure,
compartmentalized movements, but specifically aimed at what we're talking about here. That there probably are a lot of, myself included. I mean, yes, we'll talk about that at the end of the podcast. But even yesterday when we were working out, you and I were talking about how I could set up in Costa Rica, in my space in Costa Rica, how can I set up a workspace that doesn't have me sitting at a desk essentially in Costa Rica? But so many of us do sit at desks and we end up with this forward head posture. So how can people go about reversing that with that series of exercises?
Yeah, for sure. So one, sitting at a desk, there's nothing wrong with sitting at a desk. It only comes when it's so repetitive that it just becomes ingrained into your musculoskeletal neurology. Like when your whole system is just like, okay, like this is literally 75% of my movement consumption is that same forward head posture, hips at 90 degrees, knees at 90 degrees, ankles at 90 degrees. That's when it's like, you're really wrapping yourself up into a prison, and you're gonna at some point want to get out of that thing. And the longer you're in that position, the stickier and more arduous of a journey it is to unwind all the patterns that you created. So a part of the issues of being in that kind of like that rolled forward, like hyperkyphosis being like your spine's hunched forward, head's going forward. When your shoulders and spine are hunching forward because they're, say they're looking down at something, maybe a phone in your bottom right hand, might be a place. And then your visual system's going to go down there as well, which your visual systems, that's all tied into your neuromuscular system. So you can even feel it right now. If you just bring your hands to this space in the back of your neck called the suboccipital ridge, you have all these tiny little muscles back there. The highest concentrations of mechanoreceptors is right in that space. So if you're ever feeling kind of stressed, you want to kind of like just calm down a little bit. A little massage right back in this place is great. So just put your hand back there and then just look up and look down and look up, look down, look up, look down. You can feel those muscles engage. Can you feel that a little bit when you look up? Right? So your visual system, when you look up towards the ceiling, your muscles in your neck and your spine, they're all queued up to move with you. And there's even, I actually was reading recently that the muscles in, I think it's the eardrum of, I forget what kind of animal they were measuring it, but the muscles in the eardrum would actually track with the eyes. I gotta look that up, which animal it was exactly. But even your auditory system is queued up with your visual system. So if your eyes are continually looking, down to the right towards your cell phone, it's not just an eye strain thing. It's a whole body thing, which is so interesting. And then a part of that, the reason that your head's jutting forward like that is because your spine is going forward, your shoulders rolling forward, your eyes always want to stay even with the horizon. It's called the writing reflex we were talking about, I think, yesterday. So your head then comes up to balance that. And then a part of that is you crunch all those muscles in the back of the neck. You elongate the muscles in around the lower trap, mid trap, rhomboid area, the posterior shoulder girdle. So the scapula starts to kind of wing out. You'll have a lot of tightness in the front of the chest. So pec minor, major, all that stuff. Anterior delt, all closing in. And then elongation, the muscles in around the throat. And so something that you can do would be, one, start to just pay attention to creating some elongation in that space while you're working. So as we're having this conversation, now I'm sitting normal in the chair, my feet on the ground, but I'm kind of hinging my hips back and I'm creating length in my spine as I'm doing this, right? So I'm not here. I'm not just going into like hunching over and getting level with the mic. I'm actively driving my hips back, creating some spaciousness in my spine. Some supplements a person can do would just be to start to activate some of those muscles in the lower trap and anterior or posterior delt muscles, back around the ribs here. And so you can get some resistance bands. You could tie them up to, whatever. I have a thing that's we call it the strength kit. So it's got a bunch of resistance bands and a door anchor. So you can attach it to a door, but any resistance bands, and just start playing. Maintain that elongation through the spine, ribs tucked down towards the hips. So you're not flaring your hips. Imagine there's a string in the back of your neck, slowly pulling you up to the ceiling. So you're creating that elongation through the whole spine. You want to really open up that hose, and then just start playing with creating a little bit of activation, turning those muscles in the back. So grab the bands and just bring them back behind you, bring them down low on your sides, bring them down higher at your sides, bring them up overhead, always making sure that you are focusing on aligning, stabilizing, orienting your spine first. So first orient the axial skeleton, this like main frame, your torso. And then from there, you can start to work on the appendicular, work on these muscles on the outside. So that would be a beautiful thing, is just to get a resistance band in your life, hanging up from something, and do a couple reps, get yourself nice and long, find yourself, find well balanced on both feet, and start to just drive back and start to light up some of those muscles in the back of the shoulder girdle. I mean, there's a ton of different exercises, but explaining them in audio form is like terrible.
It's challenging.
So that would be the first thing, is just to start pay attention to, getting more motion going backwards. Another beautiful thing that people can play with would be, it's called the active rest position. Oftentimes it's used in different like yoga schools or different therapeutic movement modalities. And just spending some time laying on your back, bring your feet up on like a high couch. You could stack some pillows underneath it so that your sacrum is almost like it's being tractioned a little bit. So your legs are kind of being lifted by the pillows, laying flat down on your back, and just, you can bring your hands in your lower back and just breathe into the lower back. And just starting to feel that lumbar spine and all those discs, they're starting to be fed. When they're chronically contracted and kind of dumped forward in that anterior tilted pelvic position, you're chronically having stress in that place. Stress in a place or contraction leads to dehydration. So you want to have you want to have supple discs, you want to have supple muscles, and so that would be a really beautiful way to start to use your breath to actually come through and massage your body from the inside out. We think of body work or massage or chiropractic or any of that as something that someone does from the outside in. Start thinking of, how can I utilize my breath to go in and actually breathe into the back of my shoulder girdle, breathe into the sides of my ribs, breathe into my armpits, breathe into my low back, and bring your hands in around your low back here and just underneath the ribs, and just notice, people doing it right now, if you're like walking or something, it'd be a beautiful thing to do. Breathing in through the nose and just feeling that breath filling out the space in the low back, and you will literally feel your lower back start to traction, start to create space in around those the disc spaces there. So things like that, I think, are so like beautiful and easy and accessible. So there's tons. I mean, I have tons of different exercises in the book as well. But the big thing, I think, would be just paying attention to the way that you move in daily life. And if you understand the basic mechanics of how to move effectively, then the sky's the limit. There's
another post you have on Instagram. I was clearly, stalking you this morning. Yeah, when you had COVID. You were in the tub, and you were doing a bunch of breathing exercises in the tub, and I thought it was pretty cool. Some of the stuff you're describing, it would look like you were bending, breathing deeply into one side.
Yeah. You need to open. So like that, the intercostal space. So I do Rolfing and different forms of manual therapy with people, among other things. I do like essentially like training and manual therapy, but with so many people, I mean, it's like ridiculous. Almost every person that I work with, tends to be tension in and around that intercostal space. It's just kind of clamped down, and
the inter-rib space.
Yeah.
What do you mean by
the space in between the ribs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Laterally.
Yeah. All the way around the back. Yeah. All the way through. So those guys are wrapping through the ribs all the way, allowing your ribs to permit respiration essentially. So your ribs should be like bucket handles. Right. So as you're breathing, so the ribs are attaching all the way to the front of the sternum, all the way back to the spine. As you're breathing, they're going up and down, up and down, up and down. Your whole body does that. Like your organs, they have a thing called motility. So your organs are literally that same up and down, that bucket handle motion of the ribs. Your organs are doing a medial rotation they're rotating towards the midline, rotating away from the midline, rotating towards the midline, rotating away from the midline. Like every part of a living body has some inherent motion. It's a pendulum. Boom, 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 boom. So getting in and finding any kind of like stuck, dehydrated, kind of like beef jerky type places. If you have any place like that in your body, and I have tons of them in my own body, I by no means am speaking from some like transcendent, like looking down at other people. Like I was at a physical therapy session getting dry needled this morning, and I'm going through various different exercises, like try to rehab my own shit from since I was, I don't know, probably since I was a fetus, but definitely specifically since I was a little kid. So that space in and around the ribs, if you don't have that full potential of range of motion of the ribs, then it's going to be a limitation of your potential of breath, of respiration. That's like your intake. Like if you can't breathe fully, you're not a full expression of yourself as an athlete, as a father, as a mother, as a friend, as an individual. If your breath is limited, and that could have come from something, maybe there was some traumatic scenario where you wanted to cry, but it wasn't safe to cry. So you crunch it up, or it could have come from maybe an injury. Someone punched you in the ribs at some point, and you're like, oh, okay, just walk it off. And you have this almost like this dent in your frame, and you could say it's like an emotional dent. You could say it's a physical dent. They're all tied together. It doesn't matter. That's why oftentimes when people go through some type of physical, say manual therapy session or something of the sort, sometimes there's some kind of like catharsis that follows it. And it's because it's the same thread, so if you feel sad, if you feel proud, if you feel strong, if you feel afraid, is a one-to-one connection of the way that your physical body expresses that emotion, right? So that's like Sir William James. That was like one of his main things that he discussed was like that connection of the way that we think informs the way that we move. And that's the first chapter of the Align Method book is called Posture and Personality. Kind of just gets into all of the different research around that. But the breath, the way that you breathe, that's the way that we track the way that a person feels. Like if someone walks in the room and their breath is, and you're like, are you okay? Like, what's going on? You're like, I'm totally fine. You're like, okay, but you're reading well beyond their words. And so something that people can play with is just going through and starting to create a little bit of space for their breath. And I wouldn't be surprised if as your breath starts to change, maybe you start to feel different. You might start to feel, a lot of different things. And so you can go through and do like self-massage and kind of get into all those different nooks and crannies in between the ribs and just find any place that feels stiff. It feels stiff, it feels rigid. It should feel like supple, like hydrated. And if it doesn't, spend some time just kind of like slowly press your fingers into that place. And same thing, breathe from the inside out to your fingers. Maybe go through 5 breaths at each of those places. And with pretty high success, you're going to feel pretty significant change in that place. And what that leads to isn't just having like a softer rib. I like rib basket as opposed to rib cage, because rib cage, like the visual to me is like it doesn't move. But a basket, it has vitality to it. But anyway, so the rib cage will start to be able to have a little bit more pliability, but that also allows your diaphragm to start to come online. So if there's some type of torque happening in your spine, in your ribs, that doesn't allow that diaphragm to actually fully engage and fully depress to pull those lungs, then mechanically you're not going to be able to get that full breath until you communicate in with this impingement or restriction that's happening around the ribs. So, that would be a beautiful thing just to start to pay attention to in general. Again, we have tons of exercises specifically breaking all these down, talking about them on audio, not really the move, but just engaging with the conversation I think is a really important thing. And just paying attention, like noticing right now, like where is my breath? Where does it feel easy? Have you even thought about your breath? So it's like, that's the first, like, have I even ever paid attention to my breath? And then from there, it's like, okay, where does my breath feel like it easily goes? So you might find it's like, oh, it's really easy. It feels kind of like easy in the front. I mean, like my chest, kind of in like the belly a little bit. It's like, okay, cool. Now, wherever it didn't feel easy, start to see, maybe you can put a hand there and just breathe in, create some feedback. That's what a weightlifting belt does. The reason a weightlifting belt's really valuable among, just supporting you, supporting your spine. But the reason it supports your spine is it creates a feedback for you to push into. So it's not just like, it's just this dead support. It's that it literally, that feedback mechanism wrapping around that corset, wrapping around the abdomen and the lower back, allows you, as you're going into a squat or a deadlift or whatever it is, to actually create that intra-abdominal pressure and push into the belt. That is stabilization. So the way that a weightlifter would use a weightlifting belt to create feedback, to feel themselves engage that intra-abdominal pressure to stabilize their spine, you can do that in a more like yin fashion and use your hand as feedback to breathe into stuck, gunky, dehydrated, agglomerated, whatever words you want to use, places that are stuck and dehydrated. And if you can do that, then, breathing's better. I'm not going to speak on any kind of like COVID things because I'm not an expert in that realm. But I've had experts on my podcast. Dr. Stephen Quay would be an example of someone that I had on. And he was same thing. He was like saluting, he wanted to collaborate with me to create some type of respiratory exercises. Cause he's like, Aaron, like, this is it. Like, this is how we move it. We need to move the lungs in order to get that stuff out. And if the lungs are inhibited or impinged or stuck, then, obviously it would start to lead to sickness.
It's hard for people to take a deep breath.
Yeah.
I've recently started thinking about box breathing more. Yeah. And I started with 4-4-4. So 4 inhale, 4 hold, 4 exhale, 4 hold. Yeah. And I thought, well, can I do 5? And I actually found 5 to be challenging for an inhale. And I found myself limited. And of course, there's variables in terms of how quickly you inhale. But I found it actually challenging to inhale for a full 5 seconds. So I made it like, I'm going to try and just keep breathing and see how long I can inhale. And so it feels like for me, it's getting a little bit better gradually. And my goal is to be able to inhale for as long as possible. Yep. And of course, there's an acceleration. There's a slope to how quickly I'm going to inhale. But I found that to be an interesting exercise for me personally to be like, how long can I inhale? How big can I inflate my chest cavity, my rib basket? And this is relevant for COVID, for breathing for sports, like you said. And obviously I'm trying to diaphragmatic breathe. I'm trying to breathe into my stomach more than just my cage. Yep. But I start into my diaphragm, then I move up into my chest. It's important for surfing. If I'm getting crushed by a wave and I have a moment to take a deep breath, maybe I can't get a full breath, but it's a very interesting practice. And I found it very satisfying to think like, how deeply can I inhale? Yep. When I had Brian McKenzie on my podcast, he talks about how long you can exhale as well, which is another powerful thing. But I think a lot of people don't think about, we've forgotten about the importance of just thinking, how much can I inhale? Like, what's my inhale bench, right? And what's my exhale bench? Like, how much air can you move in and out of your system? I love that.
Have you ever tried freediving?
Only a little bit. I get hung up because I haven't figured out how to equalize upside down.
Oh, that's tough.
And I can't go too deep. So it's something I want to get into in Costa Rica, but I'm limited because my ears immediately hurt when I go down. So I have to work on like an upside down frenzel or whatever.
Right. So freediving is if people have the opportunity to try it with someone that's like a trained professional that can guide you through, because it's incredibly dangerous. If you go down to any, like if you're going down deep at all, it gets to be dangerous. But within that, it's like you really become so hyper aware to your respiratory capacity. And that's the thing is the body and the mind are lazy. Unless you have a problem, you're probably not going to be engaging with a lot of this stuff, which is fine. And if you place yourself into circumstances where it creates a feedback, just like the weightlifting belt, just like your own hands or your own ribs or wherever, the pressure of the water or the pressure of not wanting to, die while you go underneath the water, it really brings this awareness into like, man, like I need to be able to fill these lungs. And so within that, like you can get into air packing. I don't know if you've ever tried that before.
A little bit.
Yeah. I'm not an expert with any of this. I've free dove maybe 5 times in Tulum. But with the coach that I was with, she was teaching me about, air packing and teaching me doing like all the different tables and everything. But the air packing thing is such an interesting way to actually go in and like what you think is your maximal capacity. From there, you keep on sipping. You won't sip that many times, but you can play with that, and really just go through, and what you're doing is you're creating space again from the inside out. It's such an interesting practice to go in. Like there's so many different subtle tools that we have to make our bodies fit better. Like that's really what we're doing. That's what, that's what I care about working with clients or the book or the podcast or any of that. Our courses is educating people, and myself included, on how we can just make these human suits fit more effectively. And so if you're living in a body that's chronically, like all the stuff we talked about before, your eyes are stuck in a position. Your diaphragm is stuck in a position. Your shoulder is stuck in a position. You're inhibited in these muscles we were talking about before. You're like any of those things. The body, it will start to feel stiff, anxious, rigid, disoriented, clumsy. When someone says like, "Oh, I'm clumsy," I'm always like, "Are you clumsy? Like really? Like is that like your identity? Is that like inherent in your like your humanhood is clumsy? Or is that just something that you've neglected your physicality? Or maybe there's some inner ear thing. There could be a lot of different variables going on there. But we just need to engage with the world. Like you put yourself into those situations, like your body shows up. You just need to put yourself into the situations.
Exactly. You need to put yourself in these evolutionarily consistent situations that would have primed us for all these things that we sort of are not exposed to anymore.
Yeah.
So can you give people like not a comprehensive program, but just like I'm thinking we've talked about a lot. Mm-hmm. Like as people are going through their day, can we just summarize the things we've talked about?
For sure.
Like little things they can think about from waking up to going to sleep. Like, we talked about deep squatting, shoes without, canted soles.
Yeah.
Desk position, movement, deep, throughout the day. Mm-hmm. Like, what do you think? Like, are there 5 or 6 points people can think about throughout the day? And then
for sure,
check out your book to get the full download.
Yeah. So an easy thing would be, most people are probably, especially considering the last couple of years, probably working from home, so I think I see work as a really great opportunity to strengthen the body and, expose ourselves to maybe natural light, expose ourselves to natural air, expose ourselves, we can be essentially doing yoga while we're working, especially if we're working on a computer, so a couple little things a person can do if they are working from a computer or like an office scenario at all. Be one, if you're from home, set up a space where you're able to actually get down on the ground on occasion. Like it's so invaluable. The number one leading reason for elderly needing assisted living, is they've fallen, they can't get up. They get to a point where if they get all the way down to the ground, they ain't getting up. And so that's something that is completely 100% avoidable if we just continue engaging with the conversation of getting up and down off of the ground with regularity each day. So that would be one thing, is just, make sure when you are sitting down on the ground, make sure your hips are up above the height of your knees. That's the big cue. So like just that simple takeaway will change the potential health and vitality of your spine for the rest of your life. When you're sitting on a chair as well, make sure your hips are up above the height of your knees, because that sets you up to stabilize the lower back. So the L5, S1 vertebra, they're in more of a shape of a wedge. And so they want to hinge forward ever so slightly. So hips up above the height of your knees is going to be really helpful for that. Make sure that you are exposing yourself to natural full spectrum light. So the window isn't enough. Open the window so you're actually getting that full spectrum through. Make sure you're exposing yourself to various different temperatures throughout the day. So you get up, maybe take a cold shower. If it's cold out, maybe go out and do a little bit less layers. If it's warm out, maybe go out and just spend some time out there and get sweaty. Regularly take breaks from your work. Start implementing walking meetings. Like if you're going to go out on a date with somebody, instead of just going to some restaurant, like sitting down in chairs and just recapitulating the same thing you've done for your whole life, like let's go find a pretty spot and just go for a walk and get to know each other. And as you're out on that walk, really paying attention to the usage of your eyes. So when you look up with your eyes, that'll actually open you up to feeling more awake, more creative, more aware. Look up. When you're looking down with your eyes, it's going to start to turn you into more of like, okay, it's time to go down, calming, kind of like lower energy. So being aware of the usage of your eyes, informing the way that you feel throughout the day. I think that's a fine starting point.
Maybe go walking barefoot, think about the shoes and the canting.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Do that walk barefoot on the grass. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
The last time I had you on the podcast.
And with the shoes, if you're not walking, because I know walking barefoot's a lot, probably walking barefoot's nothing for anybody listening to this, but for like the general public, walking barefoot, in winter is probably pretty like low success rate that people are actually going to follow that. So within that, just make sure that your toe box is wide enough to not collapse your feet at all. So as you're walking, your feet, you should be able to spread your toes and go through that full articulation, full range of motion with the toes. If you can't, imagine yourself if you wore a glove that blocked off your pinky and your index finger all day long. You just taped them together. It'd be such an absolute heinous idea. Like you would never, ever do that in a million years. So similar concept within your feet, making sure that you have that full range of motion throughout the feet. And also, generally speaking, make sure your shoes are pliable enough that you can kind of like roll them up. And this that's not to say that high heels are always a bad idea, or wearing any kind of like Air Force Ones or whatever is always a bad idea. But if that's what you're wearing all the time, then it becomes really problematic. So having different scales of that. There's barefoot scale, so important. There's having shoes that allow you to have that full flexible range of motion within the foot. And then there's your Halloween costume party. These shoes make me feel sexy. Like all of those are different categories that are fine, but it really it's like the food pyramid. It's like, what's your usage of those various different tools? Because ultimately a shoe is a tool.
Last time I had you on the podcast, you corrected me and said you were veganish.
That's funny.
When I tried to.
Oh yeah.
When I tried to characterize your diet.
That's awesome.
As carnivore-ish.
Yeah.
What are you eating these days? Are you getting?
Much more meat.
Are you getting organs in your diet? You can still be veganish, but
I was always getting organs in my diet.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I was always not to the same degree that I am now. You've informed me quite a bit. You've really shifted my dietary intake for sure. I have let go of like the resistance to having too much, my idea of like too much meat or too much organs or too much flesh in general. So it's definitely much higher. And I think from my perspective, I think with veggies, which I know that you're highly resistant from, and grains and things of the sort, I still fall into the camp of, I think it's kind of like, it's not like what you do, it's how you do it. So I think that there's certain types of preparation, fermentation or maybe pressure cooking or things of the sort, that we can kind of outsmart some of those potential chemicals that would cause issues. And I veer towards, if it's Thanksgiving and grandma made some stuffing or whatever, I'm like, cool, I'm gonna do that. And I'm aware that it's probably not the best decision from like a purely cellular level, but I think there's also something to like experience, and so that's kind of where I'm at with it.
I definitely think there's a quality of life equation there. And I had Bill Schindler on the podcast recently. We talked about, he's big into these technologies that humans developed throughout evolution to detoxify certain types of foods. So I think there's legitimacy in that too. So that's cool.
Yeah.
Thanks for letting me pick your brain about that. Thanks for coming on, brother. Where can people find more of your stuff?
Yeah.
Get the full download on the book.
Yeah. Thank you for doing this.
Of course.
I really genuinely
My
appreciate
pleasure.
it. Yeah. So the book.
This is the best posture I've maintained in a podcast in a long time.
Good. That's good. So people, I know it's like, it's just not easy to describe exercises in an audio format. So if people are interested in really specific exercises to rehab and prehab and, integrate just better movement function throughout your daily life, the Align Method book would be the place for it. That's coming out January 11th. So this is expanded, revised version of the book. So we have another chapter attached to it that's all movement based that I'm excited about. And then I've had you on the Align podcast multiple times. I'm sure I'll have you back again if you're open to it. And that'd be the place. Align podcast, Align Method book. I think those are the spots.
And on Instagram, you're at Align Podcast.
Yeah, everything is Align Podcast. You just type Align Podcast in the internet. internets will take you to the
Amazing.
to place. Yeah.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you, dog. I appreciate you.
Boom.
Yeah. Thank you all for tuning in.